Welcome back to the channel. Today we're about to react to an interview of Gwen Ifill. Let me know in the comments your thoughts about this video. And as always, don't forget to like, share, watch more videos, and subscribe to the channel.
Born of a close-knit family of Caribbean descent, she dreamt of becoming a journalist. Her career has taken her from print to network television, to PBS, to the moderator of vice presidential debates. When she speaks, others listen. Her name is Gwen Ifill. The History Makers, the nation's largest African-American video oral history archive, is proud to present An Evening with Gwen Ifill. And now to our host, Michele Norris.
Hello, everyone. We are in for a special evening tonight. When she speaks, people lean in to listen. She has politics in her blood, and she's a consummate journalist, fair, balanced. My dear friend, Gwen Ifill.
I'm Gwen Ifill. Those are just some of the stories we're covering on tonight's PBS NewsHour.
Hello.
This is weird.
You know, we talk on the phone how many times a day?
A few.
A few times a day, and so you get to sort of eavesdrop, I guess, on the conversations that we have. But this is going to be even more personal because we're going to explore what makes Gwen Ifill so special. For many years, you have been in this chair, but tonight we're turning the tables. I get to interview you.
That can't be good. Okay, go
But
ahead.
before we get started, there's someone who has a special message for you.
Okay.
Can we take a listen before we
Yes.
start? Okay, let's listen.
What I like about this moment is that last time that I did something for History Makers, you were doing the interviewing, and now this time it's about you. You have had, Gwen, an extraordinary career. And every time I see you described in various publications, you always described as the best African-American female reporter, newsperson, anchor. I think you're not the best African-American reporter. You are just the best.
Vernon Jordan's here in the audience tonight. Vernon, would you please stand?
Let me know in the comments your thoughts about that. I honestly hate being titled as the best African American of anything. Why can't you ever just be the best? How would you feel if someone labeled you the best of something but put your ethnicity in front of it? Tell me your thoughts in the comments.
Many people around the globe, with you, feel like they already know you because they listen to you, they watch you, and they already have a sense of who you are and a sense of your storytelling. But tonight we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to learn a little bit more about who you are and how you do your work. And I want to ask you just, what do you think is the most important ingredient in what you do?
Accessibility. You talk about people who think they know you. I once had a former boss walk up to me at a party and say, "Last time I saw you, I was naked."
Okay, well, that's...
And I responded, "Was I there?" What he meant is he had seen me on the Today Show or something. It was early in the morning, and he decided that he felt familiar in a way we never were. But it's good. It's good because in order to tell stories, in order to bring people's understanding of our world and make them listen to you, they have to feel that they trust you. They have to think, you know this. You do it better if you find a way to communicate directly with them.
People have a sense that they know you, but there's a lot that they don't know about
I
you.
hope not.
But we're going to learn a little
My
bit about
family
that
is here. They
tonight.
know things.
They're right here. They're smiling at us in the front row. And we'll have a chance to meet some of them because we want to learn a little bit more about the Ifill family. There were 6 kids in the family. Let's learn a little bit about where you come from, your backstory. Let's take a look.
Gwen was born in 1955, the same year that Rosa Parks was arrested in Montgomery, Alabama. To an activist preacher father and a strong-willed mother.
Her dad had black consciousness, and he fit very prominently in the whole civil rights movement, and also sowed that spirit into his children.
My father was what used to be called a race man, meaning he was very, very strong in his belief in the dignity of African Americans. We grew up with a strong sense of pride. We called ourselves black before that term became actually popularly known, but also a real sort of sense of ourselves as having an identity beyond just simply kids.
We are the daughters of 2 pretty amazing brothers who in many ways shaped us. They had a kind of incisive wit. They were incredibly intelligent. They were deeply engaged in the affairs of the day. There were 3 newspapers in my home every day and probably the same in Gwen's.
And believe it or not, I think she almost always wanted to be a journalist. She was always curious. She always wanted to get sort of the story, if you will. She was always interested in what people were saying about issues or about each other. She naturally gravitated to journalism and communications, even before we really knew what it was.
Ignoring the advice of a bad guidance counselor, Gwen was admitted to Boston's Simmons College in 1973, at the height of Boston's busing crisis, where riots and protests were a frequent occurrence. At Simmons, she would find a mentor in her journalism professor and an internship at the Boston Herald. Her journalism career was off to a great start.
I love that picture.
I like all of those.
My brother's on graduation day holding me up, as they always do.
I'm really glad you didn't listen to that guidance counselor.
Mr. McDuffie, wherever you are, you were wrong.
I hope he's watching. We're going to hear more about, we'll hear more about Mr. McDuffie in a minute, but I've gotten a chance to know your family very well. They are wicked smart.
And competitive.
And a little bit competitive. If you play board games, you better bring your A game and hope that you had a lot of coffee and a good night's sleep. But I never got to meet them when they were young. And I've always wondered what it would be like to be inside the Ifill household. Take me inside that household. What was that like?
Well, it's important. My cousin mentioned this on the tape there. We were children of immigrants who came here from Panama and Barbados. They chose to be Americans. They chose to be. They chose to be Americans. They decided being American was something to strive for. Not only that, but they also, my parents could sing every patriotic song in the book, and we sang along. But they also exposed us to this sense of what America's flaws were as well, and how we could overcome them. There was never any question but that we would overcome them. And I remember doing my times tables at the table, and if I failed, this was not a pretty sight. There were tears shed.
So they had high expectations.
They had very high expectations. And you know what? That was fine. We could all stand to make our children live up to high expectations. All my brothers and sisters turned out to be amazing people. My cousins turned out to be amazing people. We see each other now at family gatherings and we're a little shocked at it all, that we survived it, because we were all poor. We didn't have any kind of middle class upbringing or opportunities to get a leg up. We started out at ground zero without any thought that we would fail.
Paint a picture in the comments. Give me a basic understanding about the amazing people that you surrounded yourself with growing up.
You were rich in important ways.
Exactly.
That's clear.
Exactly.
That's clear.
And we grew up in a religious household where we really did believe in the end that it didn't end with us. It didn't begin with us, it didn't end with us.
You grew up in a strict household also. Mm-hmm. I met your father. And so I'm wondering, as a journalist, if you learned something important, having to figure out how to question authority without being sent to your room.
Sometimes you have to be sent to your room, too. It's true that I think we would say my father and mother did not brook no nonsense. But it's also true that it taught me that sometimes every question needs to be asked. Sometimes you're not going to always get an answer, as I discover at vice presidential debates. But it means, you have to ask it anyway. And I learned to be very conscious of the fact that I'm representing more than myself when I'm in public, especially.
We heard in that tape that your father embraced a word that many of his generation had to wrestle with for a while. He decided that he was unapologetically and he was unapologetically black at a time when people of color were sort of marching away from being Negroes and moving toward being colored and weren't quite sure if they were black or African American. But he said, "I'm black."
And this was way ahead of James Brown, let me just say. It's when black was still a slur. We had gone from color to Negro. And if you were called black, that was a black so-and-so. That was a bad thing. So our father taught us to say, if someone were to call you a black so-and-so, just to say, "Why, thank you." It works when you defang a slur, because the person hurling it at you didn't really mean all along for you to be happy about it. They wanted you to be upset. They wanted you to get under his skin. But if you defang it and, in fact, embrace it,
It neutralizes.
But it neutralizes.
How did the relationship that you have with your siblings, that sense of family, that cocoon, how did that shape you as a journalist and as the person you've become?
Well, because my father was an AME minister, we moved every couple of years. You all who are familiar with the AME itinerancy, every couple of years we'd be transferred. And so in the end, your best friends growing up were your family, were the people you knew all the time. And that expanded to our extended family as well. So that made you realize the value of family first and foremost. But it also allowed you to pick very carefully who your friends are and who they're not. So I'm not confused about friendships, but I'm also very conscious about the number of people who are my friends because of my job, and those who are my friends no matter what.
I gotcha.
And that informs my thinking and informs my morality, and it informs how I gauge, not judge, but gauge the people I cover.
Many of you are very artistic. You paint,
yes.
You sing. Was that a part of your childhood growing up?
It was a part of our childhood, especially the singing. We are a very musical family, and I'm talking about every kind of music. My father would embrace everything from Nat King Cole to the highest hymns of the church.
The first time I met him, he was sitting on your couch, and he was sitting
doing a little
but
calypso.
Dancing. Yeah.
There was a little bit of that going
Mighty
on.
Sparrow.
And Little Mighty Sparrow. Very good.
I remember.
And as a result, it just became part of who we were then and now. And most of us still, I mean, even the ones who can't particularly carry a tune, still try. And I'm speaking about my brother Earl, yes. No, I love him, he's wonderful.
I want to ask you a little bit more about that guidance counselor, Mr. McDuffie. Most of us have a Mr. McDuffie in our life. Somewhere, and I hear the audience responded, And you have to learn how to push past that, how to let that just roll off your shoulder. And you did at that moment, but was that easy for you to do?
It didn't occur to me that he was right. Because at home I was getting a different message. And that's why, as you well know, your children are, I'm very close with your children. Your daughter is my goddaughter. Your son is basically my godson. He won't allow anything else. I have another godson. I feel it's very important that I am defending them and that I am showing them a way. A few years ago, after the Rutgers incident, remember with the basketball players who were called a name by a radio jock? I went on Meet the Press that Sunday to talk about it because I was angry, and I realized I had a way to speak. I had a platform to speak. And my friend Tim Russert, who was then the moderator of Meet the Press, was a friend of this radio jock and had defended him. And Tim said, "Do you want to come and talk about it?" I said, "I don't think you want me to." And he said, no, I think we need to hear it, which one of the reasons I love Tim Russert. He wanted someone to disagree with him in his house. And one of the things I wanted to say that day and did say is I didn't want anybody to walk up to my goddaughter and use that kind of language about her if she decided she wanted to excel in any sport, which she does. And it is important to speak when you have that platform, when you have that ability to get an op-ed piece printed in the New York Times where I used to work. I realized if I didn't speak for these young black girls, nobody else had the platform to do it. And that informs everything I do and say.
You use your voice whenever you
have to use your voice.
You went to school at Simmons College, where you sort of widened your sphere of influence, but also more people had a chance to put their hands on your shoulders. And you had one person in particular there who was very influential, and just even as I describe him, your face brightens up. Tell us about him.
Alden Poole was a grizzled old newspaper guy who worked and who taught me Journalism 101. And basically will tell you to this day that I got a C in Journalism 101. Something I had blocked out until he thought to remind me. But he taught me the fun of newspapering. We did grow up in a house with a lot of newspapers. We did like the idea that we could ask questions and force answers and hold people accountable. But he taught me how you could write it, too, how you could tell the story. I didn't want to be on television. Television was too shallow. Who knew? I wanted to be a newspaper reporter. I wanted to be Mary McGrory. I wanted to tell the truth in newsprint.
And did you want that? I mean, Bert suggested that you always wanted to be a newspaper.
I always wanted to write.
Ah.
I always wanted to write, and I needed a deadline, so I became a newspaper reporter. Because I couldn't actually get things done otherwise. But that was my goal. My goal was to write. I had a brief goal to be a ballerina, and that wasn't really for me.
Tell me a little something about the goals that you had growing up. And also, did you accomplish any of those goals?
But you can dance. I've seen you on the dance
It's not
floor.
ballet. Just saying.
So thanks to his influence and your decision to pursue a career in journalism, you got a job early on in Boston.
Yes.
At a newspaper, and you became a food writer.
I did. It was the only way to write. I walked in the door, and actually, even going how I got that job because I was an intern, and I came to work one day, all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and someone had left a note at my workspace that said, charmingly, "Nigger, go home." And I looked at the note and thought, I wonder who this is for.
Couldn't be talking about me.
And then it occurred to me. So I went to my boss, who went to his boss, who went to their boss. They were all properly horrified. And in the end, they said, if you ever need a job, they thought I would sue them. That hadn't occurred to me. If you ever need a job, come back. And I thought I would never go back and work for those racists until I sent out 50 job resumes and got not one nibble. So all of a sudden that job looked really appealing. So I went back to the Boston Herald American, and I was a gopher. You go for this, you go for that. And when the first writing job came open on the staff, was writing about food. I didn't know how to cook. And I learned an important thing from that, which is you learn anything you need to know. If I wake up tomorrow and some coup has happened in Moldova, I will not know anything about it in the morning. I will interview Margaret Warner about it during the day. I know a lot about it by 6 o'clock.
You were in Boston during a time of great tumult.
Tumult. It was a terrible time to live in Boston, but a good time for a reporter. Which is to say, there were riots, there was upheaval, the school busing crisis. I eventually left the food beat and started covering education, but I would cover school riots by phone because they were not paying me enough to go to the riots.
And you should talk a little bit about that, because we forget what was going on in Boston. It was actually dangerous to go to the scene of some of what was going on. It was difficult to just travel across town. There were places you could not go.
We saw a photograph of a man in a three-piece suit, black man, being attacked by an American flag. I don't know if you remember that from that time. That was Boston at that time, and that photograph was taken by a photographer who won a Pulitzer Prize, who I worked with at the Boston Herald American, who captured that just before digital cameras, just happened to be at the right place, the right time, and knew what to do with it. And that was the kind of tension. You didn't cross a bridge because you didn't know when you might be assaulted. You found a way, however, as a reporter, to maintain a little bit of distance from it, enough to make sure that you could tell the story.
You eventually left Boston, and then you went to Baltimore, and covered Baltimore during an interesting period also, sort of the rough and tumble of that city. And at that point, is that when you decided I found my home? Journalistically, I have found my home.
You know, everybody...
in terms of the beat that you were covering.
Yeah, everybody in their career has a salad days, a period in their careers where it felt like everything clicked, and that was Baltimore for me. Maybe it was leaving Boston, which was so tense, to a place that at the time didn't feel as tense. And maybe it also was covering actual elective politics for the first time, covering mayor's races and covering the state house and just doing the nitty-gritty of finding out how politics actually affects people's lives, not just how it affects the politicians. And that has informed everything I've done since.
We have a wonderful clip that will take us inside your life at that time as you were covering Baltimore during a very acrimonious time. Can we take a look?
Sure.
Baltimore, Maryland in the 1980s was led by Mayor William Donald Schaefer, touted for his revitalization of Baltimore's downtown.
As I've said so many times, I walk the street and ask people, why are you for the Ukraine?
4 years later, Gwen would move to the venerable Washington Post, where she covered Prince George's County. She would be moved to the national desk in 1988, where Reverend Jesse Jackson's presidential campaign catapulted the careers of many African-American journalists.
I just want to take common sense to high places.
She would eventually leave the Post to join the New York Times, where she covered the presidential campaign of President Bill Clinton.
Most people are working harder for less money than they were making 10 years ago. It is because we are in the grip of a failed economic theory.
So I'm the guy who nearly ruined Gwen's career. When I was editor of the Los Angeles Times, I had followed Gwen's writing career, and I very much wanted to hire her. She was thinking about television and the shift over to television at that point, and I said, hang on, that can be a very shaky business, which was not untrue.
She had to think a lot about it, and in fact, she was pretty much aggressively wooed by all of the networks and the cable networks when she was contemplating leaving the New York Times. And we had some discussion about, well, what does it mean to go to ABC versus NBC, CBS? They were all after her. And I think she chose NBC in part because no one says no to Tim Russert, but also because I think she was assured by him that journalistic standards would still be maintained, and she would be able to use that experience that she gained as a political reporter in more than just a kind of a soundbite of a minute or so.
One thing you can certainly say, Gwen, about Bill Clinton, and that is that he is a survivor. And I think we'll have to say you're a survivor, too, because you've been the New York Times reporter who has been right at his side, covering his campaign all year.
After he wins, Ifill became a White House correspondent. She then left in 1994 to join NBC as a congressional correspondent for its Washington bureau.
I was at NBC News in 1994 when Gwen Ifill came here from the New York Times. Gwen, from her very first story, made the change almost instantly for two reasons. She knows what she's talking about, and she knows how to tell a story.
Now, with only a month to go before the Iowa caucuses, these long-suffering voters are being bombarded by presidential candidates who say they can fix Washington. Every 4 years, they hope again. Gwen Ifill, NBC News, Iowa Falls, Iowa.
Two things. I always look cold in those stand-ups, and I had a lot more hair.
You've noted that for people who disdain politics or just dismiss it, that one of your roles is to help people understand how politics touches their lives in almost everything they do.
It's true, and sometimes it's a losing battle. I can't always convince people when they've just finished turning off their television set from being completely coated in negative television advertising. I once worked for a boss at the Washington Post who believed that reporters shouldn't vote, that it would somehow cloud our thinking. I had to say to him that nobody got hosed for him to have the right to vote. So as far as I was concerned, I saw the connection. I saw how it mattered. To me, if you choose not to participate, that's on you. But for me, I see the through line to what my life is today and what it would have been if people had not participated on my behalf.
So you mentioned going to work at the Washington Post. You were hired there to work first in, was it the Prince George's County Bureau?
It was Prince George's County Bureau.
You covered the State House, and you covered the campaign of Jesse Jackson.
I covered Marion Barry somewhere in there, too. I'm telling you, I did it all. I ended up covering Jesse Jackson because I was the low girl on the totem pole in 1987. I was the fresh face on the political staff, and that meant that you got to go and cover all of the candidates who no one thought could win, with all due respect. So I would walk into Dick Gephardt's rallies and Pat Robertson's rallies and Paul Simon's rallies, and they would look at me and after a while go, oh no, she's here. I was like the angel of death. But let me tell you, the one person who would not just fade away was Jesse Jackson. He stayed that year. He had run in '84. He ran again in '88. He stayed all the way through to the conventions. And so he became a great story because he was the only guy who was not Mike Dukakis. And so I spent a lot of, which in retrospect, you know, so I spent a lot of time on the road. I think I made it to 48 contiguous states that year, just traveling around and with a lot of reporters who've gone on to great, great careers because we were put in the miles in 1988.
Reverend Jackson is here this evening.
Gotcha. Well, it's a good thing I didn't say what I was gonna say. We took the early bus, Reverend.
There were a lot of reporters who were on that bus.
Yes.
Tell us what that was like at that time.
Now he's here. I don't know. Reverend Jackson would get on a plane and say, let's go to Palm Springs. We'll get there at 4 in the morning. And we'd think, who's going to be in Palm Springs for Jesse Jackson? Hundreds of people. You would walk into a high school gym, there would be thousands of people. I am somebody. There was something that really sparked an amazing engagement. The other interesting thing I discovered about covering Reverend Jackson is I did really cover Pat Robertson for a while. And when I went to Pat Robertson rallies, I went in thinking, I don't know, moral majority, what am I gonna find? And I found the same people I found at Jackson rallies. They were white, they weren't black at Jackson rallies, but there were people who felt that their voices weren't being heard. They were looking for someone else. They were drawn to these two men of the cloth because they were speaking to and for them. And so I discovered that it was an interesting thing, that race is not the only determinant of how we choose to do what we do. So it was really important for me to make that connection between these two very different individuals, but also to keep in mind that if you're covering Reverend Jackson, you could travel for days and miles and eat nothing but fried chicken. It's true. Am I right? And you know, I didn't eat chicken for 2 years. Jackie, you know what I mean. You know what I'm saying. Okay.
So you left the Washington Post and you went to the New York Times, where we saw you covered Bill Clinton's campaign, and you eventually left the New York Times and moved into television.
Can I tell a story before we go leave the Washington Post? When Michele came to interview at the Washington Post, she came over to my desk and said, so how much money should I ask for her? I said, ask for $10,000 more than you think you deserve. And she did, and she got it. Because it was the kind of thing we needed to share with each other, because that's what the boys all did.
Well, that's what you said to me. You said, because the white boys would do that.
Okay, the white boys, let's just say it. I may have said that.
So you moved from print into television. Although before we go on, we should also note that we both worked for Ben Bradlee.
We did. Ben Bradlee was a curmudgeon. He was an amazing journalist, and we were just, you know, crumbs in his path. But he created a newsroom that doesn't exist anymore, where you knew that someone had your back. I once went to a campaign event where a Secret Service agent roughed me up. And it got back to Ben Bradlee that one of his reporters had been injured. He didn't just call the head of the Secret Service, he called the Secretary of the Treasury to complain. His idea of backing up his reporters and making sure that if you were right, that he would have you, it stuck with us throughout our entire careers.
And someone who also walked the newsroom.
And he walked the newsroom.
Right over your shoulder while you were writing for the paper.
Great guy.
Great guy. We miss him. When you went to television.
Yes.
We heard from Pete Williams that you took to it almost immediately.
That's so not true. I love Pete, and it's so sweet that he thought that, but it was really hard making, and you know this, making the transition from print to television. You had to figure out how to write differently, you had to figure out how to present differently, and you had to settle on the right shade of lipstick, which was huge. It turned out that everybody had something to say about you when you were in front of the television. But the other thing is you get your phone calls returned. People felt they knew you. That accessibility quotient came to work, and you reached a much broader audience. So when I left the Times, I remember going to the then publisher, Arthur Sulzberg at the Times, and told him I was thinking of leaving to go work for NBC, and he said, "Why would you go work in television? I don't watch television." Well, that's changed. But the point was, I wanted to make sure another important lesson for the children, which is I didn't burn any bridges. I made sure in case I failed in television, I could go back to print. And I didn't fail for the same reasons why you don't fail. You work hard. It's not how you get in the door. It's what you do once you're through the door. And you make sure that you make friends and learn lessons from the people who are willing to help and ignore the haters.
And one thing that I can say, having worked in television also, is that everywhere I would go, I would find camera crews who loved them some Gwen Ifill. That you remembered that it was a team that got you on the air.
Well, I would flirt with the camera crews too, it should be said.
Okay, there was
to this day.
You covered a lot of conventions.
Yes.
And you've said that covering the conventions is actually one of your favorite parts of covering politics.
Yeah.
What do you love so much about conventions?
I'm one of the last holdouts who think conventions kind of matter. I like a room full of people who are enthusiastic about the process. I think it's important that we hear from the future leaders of our party. I was standing on the dais in 2004 when the keynote speaker finished speaking. And when Barack Obama walked over to me with the, place was crazy and the confetti was flying and balloons, and there was this electricity, you'll remember that night, and I asked him how he thought he did. He says, I think I did okay. Now, I found out later that Michele had said to him in advance, just don't screw up. So you know what? He didn't. And it was great to be there in that moment, at that time, and to talk to him about it and to capture that sparkle that came off him as he was bursting onto the scene. So I like that about conventions. It gives you a chance to be there at that moment. I was on the floor the same night Sarah Palin first spoke. The room went kablooey that night, and she was going to take the party in a whole different direction for a while at least.
Your brother has said that you as a kid used to watch conventions.
Yeah, I don't believe everything my brother says, but that's right.
You did. You did.
We watched conventions kind of for recreation. Once again, this was an extension of the fact that my parents thought that what happened in American politics and government mattered. So, and also keep in mind that when we were growing up and watching conventions, we didn't know how they were going to end. They were actually kind of dramatic. And imagine watching a convention where Barbara Jordan gets up and speaks, and you're a little black girl at home who sees nothing like this on television. It blows your mind. Where else was I going to see that voice, hear that voice? And so as a result, whenever I go through the Austin airport, I stop and pat her a little bit. There's a wonderful bronze sculpture of her in baggage claim at the Austin airport. And I just greet her every time because she was amazing. And Shirley Chisholm. I mean, there were women, black women who were out there speaking their truth in an environment where it wasn't generally welcome.
Tell me some of the things you did as a family growing up. Let me know in the comments.
I listen to you talk about this, though. I'm imagining children watching television now and seeing you.
Okay. She's going to make me a little verklempt here. You know, when I was a little girl, there was a woman named Melba Tolliver who was on the news, and she had a big afro. And I just was transfixed by this idea. Didn't make me want to be in television as much as it made me want to tell the story. And every now and then, I am not particularly interested in, I just get caught up in whatever the day's work is, and invariably somebody will come up to me and tell me the story of their little girl. And it always stops me in my tracks. Because as long as I remember that there's someone on the other side of the piece of equipment, the camera, who's watching me with expectation, and it can shape what they do next, I have to take what I do seriously every single day.
When you left network television, you went to PBS.
I did.
And you went to work for Washington Week, where you sat in the big chair at the head of the table. And you decided at that moment that you didn't want to follow a path that others had already set forth, that you wanted to do something completely different.
You know, this was the other side of the Tim Russert story. Tim wooed me into television, and then he made it possible for me to leave NBC. because when I got the job offer to not only host Washington Week, but also to be a correspondent for the NewsHour, one of the last serious hours of television in the news business, I just thought, well, I don't know. Should I do this? I'm scared. What do you think? And Tim said, you got to do this. Are you kidding me? You're going to make history. You got to do this. But I'm still under contract at NBC, Tim. Oh, I'll take care of that. And he did. And so he got me into NBC. He got me out of NBC for this next phase of my career, which was going to allow me to host my own program, to do it without shouting, to allow us to have more light than heat, which turns out to still be rare, and to work for public broadcasting, where I've now spent the bulk of my career, knowing that every single day when I get up and go to work, I'm not going to have to do a story about Chris Brown. You know? We're going to do stories that matter. We're going to do stories that really affect your lives. And we're going to start every day thinking, as we do every morning in our meetings at the NewsHour, what is the question we want to ask and why does it matter? Every day.
But you can do a story about Mike Brown. And you can say, we're going to lean in and we're going to look at what happened in Ferguson in a particular way, because you're also the managing editor. And PBS is ambitious. And we went to Ferguson, and we did an hour-long special where we brought all these people together in a room for a town hall meeting who've been talking about each other, but not to each other, about what happened in Ferguson. Wasn't my job to tell them what they ought to think. Wasn't my job to make them fight. But it was my job to seat the U.S. Senator next to the rapper who said that he would rather go to hell than be arrested by the St. Louis County Police, and watch them interact. It did my soul good to be able to be a facilitator for that, and I'm not sure there's any place else I could do it. As you talk about this phase of your career in television, let's take a look.
Okay.
In 1999, Gwen was hired by PBS.
The Supreme Court's new term, and to our new senior correspondent, Gwen Ifill. Welcome, Gwen.
Thanks, Jim. For a preview of the Supreme Court's 1999 term.
She also served as moderator for Washington Week in Review.
Now, here's moderator Gwen Ifill.
Good evening. A big week in presidential politics involving Democrats, Republicans.
There are very few people as good as Gwen is at figuring out, who's telling the truth, who's being straight with the facts, and holding them to account.
Was this the fruit of a report that you requested, that you received a week ago, that showed there was no connection between Abu Musab al-Zarqawi and Saddam Hussein? Let's start by talking about security in Afghanistan. How would you assess it now?
We expect this year, because of our elections.
And one of the things he said is that there might be repercussions if there were a U.S. attack. Yeah. Do you worry at all that a U.S. attack could backfire? As America watches these things happen on Capitol Hill, Senator Biden, was this the worst of Washington or the best of Washington that we saw play out?
When I found out I was chosen as a moderator for the vice presidential debate, Gwen Ifill was the first person I called. First of all, I thought she did such a masterful job with that debate.
She is the moderator and managing editor of PBS's Washington Week. Please welcome to the show, Gwen Ifill.
Her book on Obama would become a New York Times bestseller, and her audience grew along with her ratings.
That's a question about the working class, which is
and she interviewed the most noted.
I am so excited and so thrilled to be here tonight. I am especially happy to bring to you the story of an icon, Ms. Ursula Burns. Please help me welcome to the stage Mr. Vernon Jordan. Without further ado, please welcome Mr. Quincy Jones, Diane Carroll, Mr. Smokey Robinson, Ms. Valerie Simpson of the legendary Ashford Simpson, and the founder of Motown Records, Mr. Berry Gordy Jr. Ladies and gentlemen, my honor to present to you Miss Eartha Kitt. I have to tell you, when Eartha Kitt walked out on stage that night in Chicago for her History Makers interview, she did this thing where she kicked her leg up in the air, and there was a growl involved. She was spectacular. And little did we know that night that would be her last interview.
Yes, and we should say Eartha Kitt's daughter, Kit Shapiro, is in the audience. Let's show her some love. When we watch the video, often when women take on an anchor role they work extra hard to project authority. And you know what I'm talking about.
That wasn't ever gonna happen.
Well, no, but when we see pictures of you, you're often smiling. You're dealing with the issues of the day, very, very serious issues. But there's something that is open in your approach, which is somewhat unusual. That is one of your signatures. Is that something that you did by design, or did that just sort of happen, that sort of approach to news with a wide open heart?
Oh, thank you. It wasn't by design. I think I enjoy what I do. And all of it's not so bloody serious. And but some of it is, and we take it seriously and treat it that way. But a lot of the time, once again, you're trying to pull people in. And people talk a lot about my smiling, or they see me in person and say, you seem to have a better sense of humor than I thought. And I say, well, it's kind of hard to smile when you're talking about death and destruction. But it is important, however, to want to be listened to and to make people want to stop and pause when they're walking past the TV on their way to dinner and say, what's she saying tonight?
When you work in a position like you have, you're often the first, sometimes the only, often one of a small number. And I know you've talked about feeling like everything you do, you have the opportunity to push that door a little bit wider for someone who comes behind you. Does that feel like a burden or an opportunity?
It is completely an opportunity. So this whole idea of not being a role model, psh, come on, there aren't enough of us out here to afford that. We have to be the role model. We have to show them the way it can be done right, not lazily, not easily, but necessarily.
What do you think about journalism right now?
I am more optimistic about journalism right now than most of the journalists I know, because I think it is evolving into something different. If I wanted to judge it by what it was I got into journalism to do in 1977, yes, it's been a minute, I would say, no, it's not that anymore, and it will never be that again. We're going to something else. There are multiple platforms. There are a million ways to tell the story, and the story still has to be told by the same sets of rules. We just have to make sure that we're still teaching them.
You talk about bringing your perspective, your unique perspective to what you do, since you've lived in public housing, covering the public housing, covering HUD a little bit differently. That was evident also in how you approached presidential debates, particularly in the first debate with John Edwards and Dick Cheney. There was a question that you asked that was unique probably to you. I'm not sure that someone else sitting in that chair would have asked that question. And that was at a moment when women of color were in the bullseye of the AIDS epidemic, and you asked the candidates what they thought of that.
I asked them, I remember thinking very carefully about that question and knowing that nobody else would ask that. Also being aware that it was a vice presidential debate, so there would only be one. So I framed it by saying, please don't talk about Africa, AIDS in Africa. I want you to talk about AIDS here. And what do you think about these numbers which show this increase in HIV infection among African American women? Dick Cheney's response was, oh really, I didn't know that. That was it. And John Edwards' response was, well, my AIDS policy in Africa is this. But he didn't answer the question I had, and I discovered, I had a choice. I could say, how could you not know about this? Or I could move on. I moved on because I trusted the audience to say, if this is an issue that matters to you, this is something that doesn't matter to them. And to this day, all these years later, people still come up to me and say, I remember that question you asked. Now, it should be said that sitting on the stage of the vice presidential debate is the worst place to know what's going on. I didn't hear the, can I call you Joe? Didn't hear that at all. I didn't see her wink. Didn't see, because he was winking at me, so I didn't see any of that. It should be known that that night, and you know this too, that night at that debate, I had 2 nights before leaving for St. Louis for the debate, had fallen down the stairs at home and broken my ankle. And as a result,
What did you trip on?
I tripped on copies of the biographies of Sarah Palin and Joe Biden. His was this big, hers was that big. And I broke it pretty good, and I had a big splint on my leg, and I was in a wheelchair, and I got my boo to come with me to St. Louis to keep an eye on me, and she came and hung out with me and kept the bad people from my door because there was lots of stuff going on, which isn't worth going into, but in the end...
We're trying to get a picture of you.
Can't try and get a picture of me looking evil with my... But here's the thing, in the end, I had to do that whole debate without pain medication because I was afraid I'd get loopy, right? And then they would say, Gwen Ifill was on drugs. So I had to sit there through the debate. They had my leg propped up underneath the table. I couldn't get up to greet the candidates when they came in, so I looked kind of rude, you know. But in the end, I kind of made it through. I just plowed through on adrenaline, which is an amazing pain relief.
And you had those two gentlemen that carried you into
I couldn't walk on crutches yet, so they gave me 2 football players to get me on stage.
What were their names?
Their names were Tim and Buck.
She still remembers.
It was a high point of the evening.
And out of that experience, you wound up being portrayed on Saturday Night Live by Queen Latifah.
What can I tell you?
What was it like to watch that? Because were you at all worried? Because they can go, on Saturday Night Live, they can go a lot of different directions.
You know, you gotta just take what's coming when you're on Saturday Night Live. I mean, come on, who's gonna say no? And it was Queen Latifah. My fear is it would be Kenan Thompson playing it. So I was ahead of the game.
But it's quite an honor to be parodied
yes.
by Saturday Night Live, because that means that they're paying attention, that they've taken note of your career. And actually, there are a lot of people who have taken note of your career. And we actually have someone with us this evening. We have a very special message for you from the one, the only, the fantastic Dionne Warwick is here with us this evening.
I have a very, very special message that came in from someone that you interviewed, Miss Diane Carroll. She had been watching you on TV for some time and felt you were the only one that could interview her. Now, the shoe is on the other foot. And you are being interviewed. But she wants you to know, you make us all so very proud. Thank you.
And yes, there was a selfie taken backstage.
Gwen, you do make us proud.
Thank you.
And over the course of doing so many interviews for the History Makers, with each one, you allow us to see something of someone that we thought we knew so well. They come really prepared to unburden themselves, reveal themselves, tell stories. You understand what you think will happen throughout the evening, but there are moments, magical moments, moments of surprise that sort of happen spontaneously. And I wonder if you could share some of those.
Well, you know, Juliana Richardson lured me into the History Makers some years ago, and it just seemed like a good idea at the time. And then she came back, and she came back, and she kept coming back with something more, well, you know, Smokey will only talk to you. What are you gonna say to that, really? So it became just something I really looked forward to. I mean, who are they gonna get now? They would bring musical guests. I watched Janelle Benet, you know, slide across the stage for Berry Gordy. I got to see a most amazing moment one night with Valerie Simpson. It was her first public appearance after, some of you will remember this, after Nick Ashford died. And she sat down at the piano, and we'd seen her do it in rehearsal to, you know, it was kind of nice. And she began to sing Ain't Nothing Like the Real Thing. And you know, the first words, I see your picture hanging on the wall, but they can't talk. Oh, she began to sing it really slowly, and there wasn't a dry eye in the house, including hers and her children who were in the front row. There are moments like that which you can't plot, you can't plan, you can't scheme. But in fact, the truth is that I learned so much. And the key is, you know, from interviewing is listening as well as talking. And if you make, like you're doing for me, the conversation comfortable, you'll learn more.
What was the hardest interview that you did?
At History Makers, I've never had a hard interview. I have to say, once I get started, I mean, I thought I met Ursula Burns and thought, well, she's a real businesswoman. She's very serious about this. And next thing, it turns out she's a Panamanian. And next thing, she meets my cousin Lester, and they start talking.
And your father was from...
And my father's from Panama. So the next thing you know, it becomes this bonding thing that you didn't even see coming. So you walk into a room and you discover how much we actually have in common once we've agreed that we're going to share.
You don't like to talk about your legacy. I know you've never felt comfortable about that, but I'm going to ask anyway because I think it's important to take stock of that when we're taking stock of your career. When you think about the people that follow behind you, and I ask the question this way because you talk about that so often, you're always concerned, who's going to come behind me? You know, you look at the press corps and you think there still aren't enough women there still aren't enough people of color.
No.
When they come behind me, what, you know, whose shoulders will they stand on, and what do I want them to inherit? As you think about that now, what do you want your legacy to be? What do you want people to think about when they think about your contribution to journalism and to Washington and to life in general?
It's not enough to have walked this path and then to leave it unoccupied when you're done. And so I'm particularly drawn to young people who are interested in telling the story, however it can be told. And not just telling our stories, but being there to ask the questions which influence everybody. I mean, Black history isn't just history about Black people, right? It's history. And that's why the history makers, to me, is so important, because we're remembering our past and then building for our future. That is really important in journalism, too. I would freely admit that my ideas about what journalism ought to be may seem dated to some people, but I still think the basics are still there. I'm asking for people to be engaged, and however they act on that, you know, I have siblings and cousins who do any wide range of things, but they are all engaged in the world around them. And I hope that, too, for my godchildren, for your children, for your children. I want us all to be connected in that way. Otherwise, we're doomed to fall back.
Is there a dream interview you have for History Makers?
I think it's time for the young former senator from Illinois, after he leaves office, to come back to History Makers, don't you think? And talk about his life and his times. Can you make that happen?
And when they put together the musical entertainment for this evening, it was fitting because you have such a strong commitment to young people that we heard from young people. Also, Maya Carter Ryan. Oh my goodness. Remember this young lady and remember that name, because girl, you're going places. And she's going to take us out in song.
Dragonfly out in the sun, you know what I mean, don't you know? Butterflies all having fun, you know what I mean. Sleeping
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We all remember Gwen Ifill for different reasons. She was a journalist, television newscaster, author, White House correspondent, as well as many other positions. Let me know in the comments which of these positions, as well as her others, do you best remember her for? Also, help me get this video to 50 likes. Don't forget to like, share, watch more videos, and subscribe to the channel.